Hello, esteemed gentlemen. In war, the soldier you understand may not be the soldier you need to worry about. Because the battlefield has a strange way of exposing people. Some become louder when they are afraid. Some become dependent on the group. Some need constant orders, reassurance, or recognition just to keep moving. And then there is another kind of soldier, the one who can remain strangely composed when certainty disappears. He doesn't necessarily look fearless. In fact, he may be afraid just like everyone else. The difference is what he does with that fear. He observes, he adapts, he questions. And when the situation changes, he doesn't waste precious time mourning the fact that reality refused to follow the original plan. That matters because war is rarely the clean, predictable contest people imagine from movies. History has repeatedly shown that combat is filled with confusion, incomplete information, sudden changes, exhaustion, and decisions made under extreme pressure. Training matters, teamwork matters, discipline matters, but so does the ability to think when your carefully constructed plan has just fallen apart. And here's where the Sigma archetype becomes fascinating. Not because Sigma males are some mythical breed of super soldiers. They aren't. Sigma male isn't a recognized military or psychological classification, but the traits commonly associated with the archetype, extreme independence, emotional restraint, adaptability, self-direction, and an unusual resistance to social pressure, create a fascinating question. What happens when a soldier doesn't need the crowd to tell him how to think? Because sometimes the greatest battlefield advantage isn't being the strongest person in the room. It's being the person who can still think clearly when everyone else has stopped thinking clearly. And no, that doesn't mean this guy is wandering around the battlefield dramatically whispering philosophical quotes while explosions happen behind him. Real war is considerably less cinematic and considerably more brutal. The real question is much deeper. Why could a soldier who refuses to be psychologically controlled by fear, ego, approval, or chaos become exceptionally difficult to predict under pressure? And once you understand the answer, you may realize that the most formidable soldier isn't necessarily the one charging forward. Sometimes it's the one quietly studying what everyone else has failed to notice. Here are 12 reasons why the Sigma soldier archetype could become one of the most psychologically formidable figures on the battlefield. Number 1. They can function without the emotional permission of the group. One of the most overlooked advantages a soldier can have is the ability to think without waiting for everyone else to feel comfortable about the decision. In war, pressure doesn't always arrive as bullets. Sometimes it arrives through people. Fear spreads, doubt spreads. One nervous voice can make 10 people question what they already knew. Suddenly, the question is no longer, what is the right move? It becomes, what is everyone else doing? That is where psychological independence becomes valuable. A soldier with this trait doesn't automatically follow the emotional temperature of the group. If everyone is panicking, he doesn't panic simply because panic is contagious. If everyone is overly confident, he doesn't become careless just because the room feels optimistic. He can listen to the group without surrendering his judgment to it. That doesn't mean refusing teamwork or acting like a lone hero. In real combat, teamwork can be the difference between survival and disaster. The difference is subtle but important. He cooperates because the mission requires cooperation, not because he desperately needs approval, and that makes him harder to pressure. Praise won't easily control him. Fear won't easily steer him. Social rejection won't automatically break his concentration. He doesn't need everyone to agree with him before he can think, and in a situation where hesitation can spread faster than information, that kind of mental independence can become extraordinarily valuable. Number 2. They notice. When the mission has become more important than the people. There is a dangerous moment in war that has nothing to do with an enemy attack. It happens when following the plan becomes more important than understanding what is actually happening. A highly independent soldier may notice that shift before others do. Orders are important. Discipline is essential. Without them, a military unit quickly becomes chaos. But disciplined thinking is not the same thing as blindly repeating an outdated plan. Conditions change, information changes, people get injured, routes become blocked, communications fail. The situation that made an order sensible 30 minutes ago may no longer exist. This is where an unusually observant soldier becomes valuable. He doesn't question an order simply to prove that he is smarter than everyone else. That would just be ego wearing a uniform. Instead, he pays attention to reality. If something no longer makes sense, he recognizes it. That distinction matters. The soldier who can separate loyalty to the mission from loyalty to a particular plan is harder to trap mentally. He understands that the objective is the destination. The original plan is only one possible road, and roads can become useless. The most dangerous mistake isn't always disobeying the wrong order. Sometimes it is obeying an outdated order perfectly. A soldier who understands that difference doesn't worship the plan. He studies the situation, weighs the consequences, and stays mentally flexible when reality refuses to cooperate. Number 3. They don't need the battlefield to make them feel important. One of the quietest forms of strength is having nothing to prove. A soldier who needs to look tough can make terrible decisions just to protect his image. He may take unnecessary risks, refuse to step back, or push himself beyond reason because admitting weakness feels worse than the danger itself. Ego can turn a difficult situation into a personal performance. The independent soldier operates differently. He doesn't need everyone around him to think he's brave. He doesn't need constant praise. He doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room or the person collecting attention after every successful mission. His focus stays on what needs to be done. That creates an unusual kind of discipline. He can admit when he's wrong without feeling humiliated. He can ask for help without believing it makes him weak. He can step aside when someone else has the better idea. He can even retreat when continuing would be pointless. That's not weakness, that's control. In a battlefield environment, ego can become expensive. Pride doesn't care about consequences, it only cares about appearances. A soldier who has detached his sense of worth from looking heroic has fewer emotional traps to fall into. He doesn't need war to prove who he is. And ironically, that may make him far more effective when war demands everything from him. Number 4. They can become more dangerous after their original plan fails. The real test of a soldier isn't what happens when everything goes according to plan. It's what happens when the plan suddenly becomes useless. A rigid person can become mentally stuck because his confidence was attached to one expected outcome. When that outcome disappears, frustration takes over. He keeps trying to force reality back into the shape he expected. That's where mistakes multiply. An adaptable soldier thinks differently. When something fails, he doesn't waste precious energy asking why reality refused to cooperate. He looks at what remains. What information has changed? What resources are still available? What assumptions were wrong? What can be learned from the failure? That shift is powerful because failure becomes information instead of humiliation. And this is where the Sigma archetype becomes particularly interesting. Its supposed independence isn't valuable because the person operates alone. It's valuable because he can mentally detach from his original idea. He doesn't become emotionally married to his first decision. That means yesterday's strategy can be discarded without destroying today's confidence. The battlefield doesn't reward stubbornness simply because stubbornness looks determined. Conditions change constantly, and the person who adjusts faster can gain an advantage over someone who refuses to accept that the situation has changed. A failed plan doesn't automatically make him weaker. Sometimes it makes him more alert, because now he knows something he didn't know before, and he is willing to use that knowledge immediately. Number 5. They are difficult to manipulate with recognition. Praise can be powerful, especially in a military environment where recognition can mean a lot. Being respected, promoted, decorated, or publicly praised can give someone a strong sense of achievement. But there is a hidden weakness. Once a person becomes addicted to recognition, recognition can become a handle others can grab. A soldier who desperately wants to be seen as brave may take risks simply to protect that reputation. Someone obsessed with promotion might avoid decisions that could make him look bad. Another person may tolerate terrible pressure because he cannot stand the thought of being called weak. The independent soldier has a different relationship with approval. He can appreciate recognition without depending on it. That distinction matters. If nobody applauds him, he can still do his job. If someone criticizes him unfairly, he doesn't automatically lose his focus. If another soldier receives the credit, he doesn't have to sabotage the mission just to reclaim attention. His motivation comes from somewhere deeper than applause. This doesn't make him emotionless, and it certainly doesn't mean he dislikes recognition. It simply means praise isn't his steering wheel, and that creates psychological freedom. A person who cannot be controlled by compliments is harder to bait into unnecessary risks, harder to pressure through status, and harder to keep obedient through ego. He doesn't need a medal to know what his job is. He needs a reason, and once he has one, applause becomes optional. Number 6. They can separate fear from decision-making. Fear is not the enemy of a soldier. Uncontrolled fear is. The idea that a powerful soldier feels nothing is mostly fantasy. Real fear is a normal human response to danger. The difference is what happens after that fear appears. Does it take over the decision, or does the person acknowledge it and continue thinking? A psychologically disciplined soldier can feel fear without automatically obeying it. That distinction is enormous. Fear says, "Move now." Discipline asks, "Where?" Fear says, "This is impossible." Clear thinking asks, "What options are still available?" Fear wants an immediate reaction, because immediate reactions can feel safer than uncertainty. The independent soldier learns to create a small gap between emotion and action. That gap can be incredibly valuable. He doesn't have to pretend he is fearless. In fact, pretending can make someone less prepared because denying fear means ignoring useful information. Fear can signal danger, exhaustion, confusion, or a problem that needs attention. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. It is to prevent fear from becoming the commander. This is where the Sigma archetype becomes interesting. Its strength isn't some magical absence of emotion. It's the ability to remain mentally separate from the emotion long enough to make a better decision. He can be scared and still think. He can be uncertain and still assess. He can feel pressure without immediately surrendering to it. And that may be far more formidable than simply claiming to have no fear at all. Number 7. They study people as carefully as they study the battlefield. A battlefield is made of more than terrain, weapons, and maps. It is also made of human behavior. And sometimes, understanding what people are likely to do matters just as much as understanding where they can go. An observant soldier pays attention to patterns. He notices who becomes nervous under pressure, who communicates clearly, who suddenly becomes unusually quiet, and who repeatedly makes the same mistake. He watches how people respond when plans change. He pays attention to inconsistencies instead of dismissing them. This doesn't mean he can magically read minds. Nobody can. It means he understands that people are creatures of habit. Under stress, those habits can become even more obvious. Someone who always hesitates before making a decision may hesitate again. Someone who becomes reckless when frustrated may eventually expose that weakness. Someone who follows the crowd without thinking may behave predictably when the group becomes confused. The Sigma archetype becomes interesting here because it is often associated with observation before participation. Instead of immediately reacting to what everyone is doing, the soldier studies why they are doing it. That creates a different kind of awareness. He isn't only asking, "Where is the threat?" He is asking, "What behavior is revealing something about the situation?" That question can uncover details other people overlook. And in an environment where information is incomplete, noticing small human patterns can become a serious advantage. Sometimes the most useful intelligence isn't written on a map. It's written in people's behavior. Number 8. They don't confuse silence with inactivity. Silence is often misunderstood. A quiet soldier can easily be mistaken for someone who is disconnected, passive, or simply unsure of himself. But silence can also mean that someone is collecting information before deciding what deserves a response. In a high-pressure environment, that distinction matters. People often talk when they are nervous. They explain, speculate, repeat rumors, and sometimes fill every uncomfortable pause with noise. The problem is that more talking doesn't necessarily produce more clarity. Sometimes it produces the opposite. A disciplined, observant soldier can resist that urge. He listens, he watches, he processes. He doesn't feel compelled to announce every thought passing through his mind. That gives him more room to notice details that constant talking can bury. This doesn't mean silence is automatically intelligent. Quiet people can make terrible decisions too. The real advantage comes when silence is combined with awareness and judgment. That is where the Sigma archetype becomes compelling. He doesn't need to constantly demonstrate that he understands what is happening. He can remain quiet while gathering information, then speak when his contribution actually matters. And there is something psychologically powerful about that restraint. People often reveal more when they don't feel interrogated. Conversations unfold naturally. Patterns become easier to notice. Contradictions become harder to hide. The silent soldier isn't necessarily doing nothing. He may simply be refusing to waste attention on things that don't deserve it. On a battlefield, where information can be scarce and confusion can be everywhere, knowing when to stop talking and start observing can be an underrated form of discipline. Number 9. They can abandon their ego faster than their opponent can. Ego becomes dangerous when a person would rather be right than survive. A soldier can make a bad decision and still defend it simply because admitting the mistake feels humiliating. Once pride gets involved, changing direction can feel like weakness. The person starts protecting his reputation instead of protecting the mission. A psychologically disciplined soldier does something far more difficult. He can let go. If a decision was wrong, he doesn't need to spend 10 minutes creating excuses for it. If another soldier has a better idea, he can use it. If the situation changes, he can change with it. There is no emotional attachment to proving that his original judgment was perfect. That is a rare form of strength. The Sigma archetype becomes interesting here because independence isn't just about ignoring other people's opinions. It is also about being independent from your own ego. That's the part many people miss. A person who is controlled by his pride can become predictable. Challenge his authority, and he reacts. Question his decision, and he becomes defensive. Make him look foolish, and he may take unnecessary risks just to restore his image. But someone who can say, "I was wrong," without falling apart, is much harder to manipulate. He doesn't have to win every argument. He has to make the better decision. And when circumstances change, he can abandon yesterday's pride without sacrificing today's judgment. On a battlefield, That kind of flexibility isn't glamorous. It is simply smart. Number 10, they learn from the enemy without needing to admire them. One of the biggest mistakes a soldier can make is assuming that understanding an enemy means respecting their beliefs. It doesn't. You can completely reject what someone stands for and still study how they operate. That distinction matters. An emotionally driven person may underestimate an opponent because anger has already decided the story. They see the enemy as foolish, predictable, or incapable simply because they dislike them. But hatred is a terrible intelligence officer. A disciplined soldier looks past the emotion. He asks what the opponent does well, what habits keep appearing, what mistakes are repeated. How do they respond when circumstances change? What assumptions seem to guide their decisions? None of those questions require admiration. They require curiosity. This is where the Sigma archetype becomes particularly interesting. Its supposed independence can mean refusing to inherit the crowd's opinion about an opponent without examining the evidence personally. If everyone says, "They're incompetent," he still wants to know why. If everyone says, "They always do this," he wonders whether that pattern is genuine or simply something people have convinced themselves is true. That mindset protects against arrogance. The enemy doesn't have to be impressive for their tactics to be effective. A person can dislike an opponent completely and still admit when that opponent has identified something others missed. And that is the uncomfortable advantage of learning without admiration. You don't have to like your opponent to understand them. You only have to care enough to stop underestimating them. Number 11. They don't mistake aggression for strength. Aggression can look powerful, but looking powerful and being effective are two completely different things. A soldier who reacts to every threat with anger may feel unstoppable, but uncontrolled aggression can destroy judgment. It can make someone rush when patience is needed, waste energy, ignore warnings, and turn manageable problems into much bigger ones. The more disciplined soldier understands something simpler. Strength is having control over the urge to act. He doesn't need to prove that he is tough every 5 minutes. He doesn't confuse shouting with authority or reckless behavior with courage. When action is necessary, he acts. When restraint is smarter, he restrains himself. That distinction makes the Sigma archetype interesting. Its strength isn't supposed to come from being cold or violent. It comes from being difficult to provoke. Insults don't automatically become challenges. Pressure doesn't automatically become a reason to lash out. Someone trying to trigger him may discover that there is nothing to grab onto, and that can be frustrating for anyone trying to manipulate him. Aggression is often easy to predict because emotion leaves fingerprints. Anger creates patterns. Impatience creates mistakes. Pride creates openings. Control does the opposite. A soldier who remains composed doesn't give away his next move simply because someone pushed the right emotional button. He doesn't need to look dangerous. He understands that the person who controls his own reactions has already controlled the first battlefield, the one inside his own mind. Number 12. They can function. When certainty disappears, certainty feels comfortable, but war rarely offers much of it. Plans change. Information arrives late. Communication breaks down. People misunderstand instructions. Something that seemed obvious an hour ago can suddenly become unclear. For someone who needs every detail settled before making a decision, that uncertainty can become mentally paralyzing. A psychologically flexible soldier handles it differently. He accepts that he may not have the full picture. That doesn't mean acting recklessly or guessing blindly. It means making the best decision available with the information currently in front of him, while staying ready to change that decision when better information appears. This is where the Sigma archetype becomes particularly interesting. Independence isn't just refusing to follow people. It is being able to think when nobody has a perfect answer. Instead of desperately searching for certainty, he asks better questions. What do I know? What don't I know? What has changed? What can I verify? What is the smartest move with what I have? That mindset prevents uncertainty from becoming panic. He doesn't need the world to become predictable before he can function. And that's important because waiting for perfect clarity can sometimes be its own mistake. The strongest form of confidence isn't believing you always know what will happen. It is knowing that if circumstances change, you can think again. You can revise. You can adapt. You can admit that new information changes the decision. Because when certainty disappears, the person who can still think clearly hasn't lost everything. He still has judgment. Conclusion. In the end, the idea of the Sigma male as a formidable soldier isn't about being fearless, violent, or some unstoppable lone wolf. Those are easy stories. The reality is far more interesting. The real strength lies in psychological independence. It's the ability to think when everyone else is reacting, to question an outdated plan without becoming arrogant, to adapt when everything falls apart, to accept fear without allowing it to make every decision, to study an opponent without underestimating them, to control aggression instead of being controlled by it, to abandon ego quickly when reality proves you wrong. Most importantly, it is the ability to function when certainty disappears. Because war doesn't care about confidence. It doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care who looked impressive 5 minutes ago. It tests judgment, discipline, adaptability, teamwork, and the ability to remain mentally functional when pressure becomes overwhelming. And that's where the Sigma archetype becomes fascinating. Not because Sigma males are magically superior soldiers. They aren't. No personality label can replace training, experience, leadership, teamwork, or discipline. But the qualities associated with psychological independence can create a person who is unusually difficult to shake, manipulate, provoke, or mentally overwhelm. The strongest weapon may not always be carried in the hands. Sometimes it is the ability to keep your mind when everything around you is trying to take it away. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for more deep dives into psychology, personality, independence, and the traits that make certain people remarkably difficult to understand.